welcome to the Simply Snapping Mom series videos. My name's Renee. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm a mom of 3 kids. I work full-time and I always loved photography, but I really started to get into it when I realized that my kids were growing at alarmingly fast paces and I wanted to hold on to those moments and remember them forever. So I get this new camera. I pull it out of the box, I start taking pictures, and they were all terrible. They were all blurry, they were dark, I hated them all. So I was determined to learn how to use my camera. I started practicing and reading constantly. So the reason I started making these videos and starting my Simply Snapping Mom blog was to teach other people what took me years of reading and practice to learn. And I want to be able to teach you very quickly, because when you really understand what the camera can do, it's not hard. So to prove to you that I was not this magical photographer the moment I picked up my camera, I'm going to show you a couple of my earlier pictures. Now keep in mind, when I took these pictures, I thought, hey, these are okay. But looking back now, I think they're terrible. So just to show you some of the progress. Till now, a couple years later, these are the types of pictures I'm taking. And what is the difference, you might ask? So this video is designed for super early beginners to really start to understand the 2 main camera settings on their camera. Once you start to understand these settings, you can start practicing and learning more about them, but I'm going to put it in terms that will make sense. The first setting we're going to talk about is aperture. I know when I started reading about photography, that made no sense to me. I had no idea what aperture was. It sounded like a different language. It was very hard for me to try to conceptualize what I was reading and what I was learning. So I have my camera here. I'm going to put that aside for now, because I want to teach you so you understand it, not just the numbers and the letters. So believe it or not, the developers, the inventors of the camera did not invent the wheel. They mocked the camera essentially from an eye. So the first setting, like I said, aperture, we're going to think of it as the pupil of the eye, the opening in your eye. Think of it when you go outside in the bright light, your pupil is going to constrict or get smaller so that it lets in less light. When you go inside, or if it's a dark atmosphere, the pupil is going to open to let in more light. So that is exactly how your camera works. You can make the opening of your camera by adjusting the aperture, or we also call it Fstop. You can make it large to let in more light, or you can make it small to let in less light. Another thing that's interesting with this setting is that when the opening is larger, you will get more of a background blur. When the opening is smaller, you will get less of a background blur. So you will go through this more in other modules, but a f-stop is how we measure the aperture. So a smaller number, so maybe an f-stop of 2 would be a larger opening compared to a larger number, which is actually a smaller opening. So an f-stop of maybe 16. Again, that's more for future modules, but I wanted to mention that now, that f-stop number is what determines how big that opening is. Here are pictures demonstrating this. This first picture is my subject holding a flower, and it is a high number f-stop, which means a very small opening. Think of a constricted pupil. It's letting in more light, there's less background blur. You can see that the subject and the flower are around the same clarity. In this next picture, I set my camera to a bigger opening. So that let in more light, think of a dilated pupil, and there is more of a background blur. So you can see on this picture of a camera, This is what the aperture is. It is usually an F number on the back of your camera. So again, think of the aperture setting as your pupil, where it could dilate or get larger to let in more light, or it can constrict and get smaller to let in less light. It really all depends on the scenario and the environment where you're taking your picture in. The next main camera setting we're going to talk about is shutter speed. You want to think of shutter speed as your eyelid. The shutter speed determines how fast the shutter on your camera opens and closes. So think of it this way. If something is moving in front of you and you open your eyes for a long time, you can see that image moving. If you blink very quickly, you're not seeing any movement. That is exactly how your camera works. So if you have a slow shutter speed, your camera opening will be exposed longer. So for example, if I'm taking a picture with a slow shutter speed, it would be more like this, slow. So it can let more light in, but it's taking in all the movement. So there's going to be some blur if your subject is moving at all. If you have a fast shutter speed, boop, then it's not taking in as much light, but it's also not taking in as much movement, so your picture will be more clear. So here's an example when I used shutter speed to get different effects on my pictures. In this first picture, I used a very slow shutter speed, meaning that it was like a longer blink. It was open longer. So you could see that my subject, who's jumping out of a swing, you could see the movement blur. On the other hand, when I increased my shutter speed so that it blinks much faster, then you will not see that movement blur. Even though my subject is flying through the air, the picture is clear. So here is where shutter speed is on your camera. It is how fast the shutters open. So it's a number that's typically 1 over another number, and what that means is the amount of seconds that it's open. So if your shutter speed is 1 over 50 seconds, it's 1/50th of a second. If it's 1 over 500 seconds, it's 1/500th of a second, so super, super fast. So that's what that number is telling you, is how fast it's blinking. So to summarize it, think of your camera settings as your pupil and your eyelid. These are the two main camera settings that you have to learn first. Everything else will start to make sense once you grasp these two settings. So again, think of aperture, or that f-stop number, as your pupil. It could be large and dilated to let in a lot of light, or it could be small and constricted to let in a little bit of light. And then think of your shutter speed as your eyelids. So it could open very quickly, a very fast shutter speed to let in not a lot of light, but no movement blur. Or it could be open longer to let in more light and movement blur. So for more up-to-date discussions on photography and family, head on over to my Facebook page at facebook.com/simplysnappingblog, or head over to my website at simplysnappingmom.com. Here you will find a ton of resources, including free videos, free printables, and a ton of other discussions on photography. I hope this made snapping a little more simple for you. Thank you for watching.